Hi, everyone. Welcome to Random Fit with Wendy Batts and Ken Miller. And on this episode, we are going to talk about the brain and body connection, how strength, recovery, and even pain aren't just about the muscles and joints themselves, but more about the nervous system and what's happening within our brain.
And from there, we'll talk a little bit about working out, how you can change your workouts to recruit more of that brain to help you be stronger, faster, do whatever you want to do in life better. So listen to the podcast, enjoy, but leave us a 5-star review when and where you can.
You're listening to Random Fit with hosts Wendy Batts and Ken Miller, winner of a Gold Markham Award for Digital Media.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us on another episode of Random Fit. I am Wendy Batts here with my friend and co-host, Ken Miller. Ken, how's it going?
Wendy, I'm good. You're looking good. Keep it up. Keep up the good work.
Why, thanks. You as well. You did your hair for us and everything today, so it's fantastic. But on this episode, we are going to talk about the brain and body connection. Ken, I know you and I were talking about having clients and when they come in and we start in different phases of the model after the assessment, we start to see major changes really quickly when they first begin working out, but they don't actually grow in size. So we're going to talk about why that happens and dig a little bit deeper.
Yeah, you and I, Wendy, for our listeners out there, Wendy and I, we get on the phone every now and then, and occasionally we talk shop about our own personal training clients and, some of the struggles and successes even that we have. But conversation that we just had recently was about, clients that say, hey, I got stronger faster than I anticipated getting stronger. And I think Wendy said, well, I've had clients that, they get stronger, but they're not necessarily seeing bigger muscles, bigger arms, bigger quads, yet they're curling more, they're pressing more, they're pushing more, they're squatting more. So the topic came up of, okay, so why the strength gain without the size gain? How does that happen? I thought movement and strength was based on muscle, right? Well, here's the thing. Muscles don't do anything without the nervous system, right? The brain rules it all. So when the brain figures out, okay, well, this is what needs to be done. Okay, what do I need to do to get that particular task done? And then it figures out a way to coordinate movement, kind of figure out, okay, what's the most efficient way? Okay, what movements don't we need? What muscles don't need to work in this motion, in this direction, with this force, in this plane of motion, or what have you. And then it figures, okay, well, what do I need? And then from there it says, okay, well, we took out what we didn't want. We added what we do want as far as recruitment patterns, as far as how the muscles are being used. And then from there, just by being more efficient, again, orchestrated by the nervous system, you get stronger, right? So, yeah.
You got to think of, the nervous system. So think about it. It's starting in your brain, right? So there's actually, if we think about the central nervous system, we're talking about the spinal cord in the brain, right? And that decides what needs to happen. That's what's initiating the movement. It's going to help regulate our reflexes, and it actually processes the input that's going into our head. And then it's like, well, okay, we're getting this information in and it's processing, saying, okay, now what needs to happen? And then that's when we look at the peripheral nervous system, and that's basically going to carry out the commands that the brain has. And so the reason we emphasize so much about doing assessments in the very beginning in order to truly help your client move better, or if you're a fitness enthusiast yourself, move better, is because over time, our brain, which if we think about the brain is kind of the software, right? It's the programming for your phone, your computers, whatever it is. And we're trying to always put very good input in, because whatever you put into your head is going to help us hopefully have good movement. However, over time, we get these compensations because we're sitting at a desk, we're sitting in a chair, or sitting at a desk, so rounded shoulders, forward head, sitting in a chair, so we're in a seated position, so our hips are getting tight. We might wear cute shoes that might have a small heel on them, so it's going to tighten our calves. All of this leads to compensation patterns. And then the body's like, hey, this is what I know because these muscles are tight. This is how I want to live because these muscles aren't giving us the length that we need to stand correctly or move correctly. And then we're actually putting bad information into our brain. So the hardware is now, or software is being programmed the wrong information, not the right information to help us move better, feel better, and perform better. So the nervous system and the brain is basically what's telling our muscles to fire this way or stand this way or sit this way. And I think it's sometimes hard to comprehend because we're so focused on movement. But if we don't train our brain right, then no matter how hard we train, we're not going to be able to execute to our maximum potential unless we start with smaller movements first, ensuring the right muscles fire at the right time and the right plane of motion.
I think the analogy you brought up, Wendy, as far as software and hardware, I mean, that's a great analogy that I've used. I haven't used it in a while, but from that, I mean, yeah, like you said, the body's the hardware, the brain is the software. So just like when you look at your phone and you have software updates, or you look at your computer, you have software updates. That's an improvement on the system. I think a lot of people don't realize. It's like, okay, your brain has operated your hardware for a certain task for a certain amount of time, but if you want to do something different, if you want to do something more, let's say your priorities change. Maybe now you have a family and you have kids that are playing sports. And you want to be able to throw again. Just the other day, I took my son out to the park and I was throwing the ball, and I hadn't thrown the ball in like 6 months since last baseball season. So here I am. I'm like, all right, you got to give me some time. my computer's rebooting right now because I'm like, let me warm up a little bit more, and because I'm just thinking that I am going to be sore because my son, he's bigger, he's stronger than he was last baseball season. So here I am, my brain, I just want to get the ball in his glove, right? And I don't want him chasing a ball down the park. But my software needs updating, especially if throwing the baseball is something I plan to do more of in the future. So I need to coordinate, my hip rotation, my trunk rotation, my shoulder rotation, how I hold the ball, where I release the ball, and then not to mention he's throwing harder too. So now I have to reflexively be able to react to where that ball is. So now there's that aspect of playing a sport. So my brain has to go through an update so my body can actually do the task that's required of me. And in this case, and it's baseball. But I think the other part of that story, Wendy, that you brought up when you talk about when you sit down a lot or you're wearing those cute little shoes that's going to elevate your heel, your brain actually accommodates that as well. So just like we can get an update for good, you can get an update for bad as well. So bad input, bad output. So the brain will do what it needs to do to get you from A to B to accomplish a certain task. But if your brain's saying, I have to get you from home to work to home, wearing those cute little shoes with the elevated heels, right? Then it's going to say, all right, calf, I don't need you as much, right? Because you're going to be a little shortened. You're not going to need to get all that ankle motion that we usually need if you're barefoot, or anterior tibs or the muscles in the front of the shin. I'm not going to need you as much either because I don't need you to pick up the forefoot so that when you walk, you clear that foot so that you can walk without the fear of tripping. I don't need you to do that either. And hip flexors, I don't need you, and so on and so forth. So it starts to actually downgrade the capabilities of your hardware or your body in this case. So I love that analogy from the standpoint you can update the software for the better, but unfortunately for most people, it's a downgrade as far as what you want your hardware to do.
Well, and I think too, it's really important that I know when I train a client that hasn't worked out in a really long time, and I'm like, okay, we're going to do something as simple as like a balance exercise. and they are struggling to stand on one leg and move the other leg maybe in different planes of motion, so forward or out to the side, or even try to rotate it back without, having the arches fall, having the knee cave in. And they're like, why can't I do this? Because I usually do this in front of a mirror when possible, because I'm trying to have them see, listen, when you do this, your second and third toe, your kneecap and your hip all need to stay lined up. And that's what we need to focus on. So we need to have good arch alignment, because that's going to help with, activation of the hip and the glute and everything else. Like, it literally does start at the foot and works its way up. And it's interesting because people are like, I stand up every day. I stand on one leg when I'm walking. You're spending a majority of the time on one foot as you're walking or doing activities of daily living. Why can't I do this? And it's not that they can't, it's just retraining the brain, because we are focused so much on standing with the feet straight ahead, making sure everything's properly lined up. So what we, through NASM, say the 5 kinetic chain checkpoints, we do that because if we're standing that way, we know biomechanically our joints are lined up the way that they are intended to. And if we have good joint alignment, obviously we have got good muscle length on each side of the joint to get that movement to produce correctly. It's just retraining that system. Like, if you're used to standing with your feet out, you weren't born that way. Most people are like, oh, I've always stood this way. Well, it's because your calves are tight and you should be standing with your feet pointed straight ahead. So we're going to have to work on that. And maybe for 4 to 6 weeks, it's going to feel like you're standing pigeon-toed, and you're going to have to look down and make that correction, because it's not going to be automatic. But the more we practice and we synchronize, as you were saying, Ken, synchronize movement, and we synchronize standing correctly and moving correctly, we're retraining our brain. This is now the new thing we want you to do automatically, but we have to put time in order for that to happen. And, everyone wants instant gratification, including myself, but it does take time.
It does, but not as much time as people think, right? Because a lot of it is just awareness. And I think you brought up the central nervous system, you brought up the peripheral nervous system, and then the last piece, so to speak, is the proprioceptors. So when we talk about the receptors, Golgi tendon organs, muscle spindle fibers, and these are your these are your sensors. These are the components that lie within your body, all over your body, especially when you talk about the muscle bellies and close to the tendinous junction of the muscles. So what these receptors, these proprioceptors, do is they kind of sense, like say with the muscle spindle fibers, they sense the stretch and the amount of stretch and the change in length of the muscle. So it's sending signals back to the nervous system saying, okay, your muscle just did this. Do you want to do that? Right? If it's fast enough, reflexively, it's going to say, no, we're not going to go there because I don't feel comfortable with the joints moving that far, that fast. Right? And then you also have the Golgi tendon organs, which actually senses tension and tension change. So again, without getting into other components of working out, these two receptors, again, there's different types of receptors, proprioceptors out there that tell you pressure, change in center of gravity, when you're shifting forward, if you got more weight on the right side versus the left side. So those are the two main ones that we speak through with the National Academy of Sports Medicine. But it's when those receptors, they feel something happening, when they feel a shift in length, change in length, rate of speed of change in length, or pressure and change in pressure, it sends a signal to your body. That way your brain kind of has this dynamic awareness of, okay, my body's in this position, this place, and it's got this much more weight on it or no weight on it. But the thing about that, when it comes to sensing, like you're saying, Wendy, your position in space, is that if you sense that your feet are turned out, it's going to start turning off those receptors and telling you, oh, my feet are turned out. So it's going to start to think that foot turned out position, or that hip tilted position, or that knock-kneed position, it's going to think that is normal, right? And so something that you and I, Wendy, do when we teach workshops is that we have the students, or when we have a chance to speak to the public, we say, go ahead and stand there and close your eyes, right? And you're just feeling where your foot is and your body is in space. And then we tell them, turn your feet. So look down at your feet and turn your feet so that your second and third toe are pointing 12 o'clock straight ahead. Not your big toe pointing straight ahead, but the middle of your shoe or your middle foot, middle toes are pointing straight ahead. Now close your eyes. Now stand there. And what does that feel like? And that's where now your feedback is going to be what, Wendy? What do they say 9 times out of 10?
I feel pigeon-toed.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah.
So they have calibrated, their nervous system is calibrated that with their feet turned out, that is pointing straight ahead, so that when you actually rotate it in, now you're like, hey, wait, that is not straight ahead. That is actually turned in. But when you look at it, you're actually straight ahead. But that's because your nervous system, your brain has calibrated to be, this is normal. And what I'm doing, if you're not watching us on one of our videos here, if you're standing there, your 0 is your feet turned out. But when you internally rotate to get your feet pointing straight ahead, you actually feel rotated inward. And that's a great example of bad information in, bad output. So your body position, your body awareness is going to be skewed. And this is where training, like what you said, Wendy, training with strong consideration for proper posture, alignment of your ears, shoulders, hips, knees, and ankles, where and when they need to be, depending on the movement. That's why that's so important, because if you move from a wrong position or a bad position or less than optimal position, how your body recruits the muscles are going to reflect that bad movement pattern again. It's going to be a downgrade versus an upgrade.
Well, and it's interesting that you say that, because I have to laugh. I mean, there's so many things that we used to do in workshops. I mean, I know you would do that one. I would do one where, I would have someone stand with their feet straight and put their arms out, close their eyes, and just march in place. And, the whole class would end up laughing, because when they're marching in place, all I want them to do is pick up one foot. I have their arms out just for safety, because I know what's going to happen is they start traveling. And they don't realize that they're moving. They feel like they're staying stationary, but as they pick one foot up, they actually start moving. And sometimes it's sideways or opposite directions. And then after I time it, I'll say, okay, open your eyes. And they are nowhere near where they started. It's just because, proprioceptively, meaning what's around them in their environment, or what they feel that they're doing, isn't necessarily truly what they're doing. And that's what happens with our body. That's the whole purpose that we go through the training process. We're looking for, okay, we know this muscle is not in an optimal position. We know that because of the way someone stands and what we saw in the assessment. So what can we do to retrain the brain to make this correctly? And that's when we start looking at our corrective exercise of, if we go through and foam roll some of these areas and down regulate the activity. And then we go through the stretching, like you just talked about with the muscle spindles. They're going to freak out as soon as they start movement. And then if you hold it for 20 to 30 seconds, they're like, oh, wait, nothing's going to tear. Maybe I can relax a little bit further. And that's what gives us better range of motion in a muscle that's sometimes overactive and tight. So, it's retraining your brain. Like, it's okay to go this range of motion. It's okay to now start firing. But that brings us back into thinking about the brain not being this fixed thing. I mean, our brain is always changing. It's called neuroplasticity, if you want. And that means just the neural pathways, meaning the information that we're bringing in, and then the information that we're commanding, or basically saying, I want you to do. We can strengthen that over time, because it will weaken if we don't work on trying to incorporate new routes of training and new ways of training. But, depending on if there were certain injuries, we may be very protective. We've got to start to override that protection if it's not necessarily something that's good. And when something like learning a new skill, like if I'm teaching Ken how to do something and he's never done it for the first time, it's actually kind of amusing, because he's my friend and I'm like, why can't you do this? But with a new client, if they've never done a squat of a certain way that you're asking them to do, it feels very awkward. And then they don't think that they're doing it well, and their mechanics and the synchronization of that movement isn't great. But as we work on it each and every session, whether we change it up and do it a very different way, meaning one time with dumbbells, one time with cables, but we're still working on that same movement pattern, we become it becomes easy for us to do. We are synchronized in the movement. The joints are moving optimally together in harmony in the way that they should, versus it being this broken, okay, I'm hinging at the hips, then my knees, then my ankles are bending. It should be just one solid flowy movement. And that's what we're trying to get our brain to open up and do. So the more we can make those repetitions good, and we're teaching good information in, then when they're out doing that same repetition, whether it's sitting up or standing up, whatever it is, still a squat, right? But they're not in the gym. They're
Right.
just doing activities of daily living. That becomes more automatic, and we're working our muscles more efficiently in the way that they were intended to move.
Absolutely correct.
Thanks.
Agreed. Before I get to the next, I do want to ride on that thought, Wendy, but just want to let you guys know, those of you listening to both Wendy Batts and I, Ken Miller here on this episode of Random Fit. This episode of Random Fit is brought to you by NASM One, the membership for trainers and coaches. Members enjoy unlimited access to hundreds of career resources. Get the Edge app to schedule and program clients. Enjoy half off all certifications and specializations. Access free CEUs and more. All this for just $35 a month. Go to nasm.org/membership to learn more about NASM One. So Wendy, while you were speaking, I think you brought up neuroplasticity, and one of the things that you and I talk about a lot is the neural continuum, right? And it's about putting or implementing changes, something that without increasing the intensity by 1 pound or moving 1 inch farther, you can increase the intensity or the complexity, if you will, of a movement pattern by just changing body position. So one of the things, just to give a quick example, again, Wendy, you've done other podcasts on the neural continuum, but what we are simply talking about is if you were to do something as simple as a bicep curl, right? You do that bicep curl standing on 2 feet, and you just curl your bicep, curl the dumbbells, flex the biceps. Then you can go on to an unstable surface. Now you're standing on an AirX pad or something along those lines. You can go staggered stance, single leg stance. So you're just changing your base of support. Now here's the thing. You're doing the same bicep curl, but neurologically it's different because you're changing your base of support. You're changing the complexity and the demand of the activity by changing the base of support. I just had a client yesterday who's coming back from injury, but he's one of those kids, Wendy, and I'm sure you've had these guys hundreds of times. That one guy and he's a high schooler, just to kind of give some context to it. These guys, you gotta tell them to slow down. They just want to go fast, they want to go heavy. But here he is, he's in a rehab situation for his shoulder, and he just wants to curl and go fast. But how I figured out how to temper him a little bit is get him from 2 feet to 1 foot. And then I just say, all you need to do here, you can curl as much as you want. Just keep the shoulders and the hips level, right? Keep that one leg, hip, knee, and second and third toe in line. And you can curl as much as you want. And guess what? He's so concerned about balance, right? Controlling his body, that he can't even do the weight that he used to do. Right?
Mhm.
Let alone, and of course, ears, shoulders, hips, knees, and ankles all in good line. But because his nervous system has other priorities, and this priority is not curling dumbbells, his priority is don't fall over, for one, right? Standing on that single leg. But for two, hips level, shoulders level, you can do all you want and just keep those two things. And he's so, now concerned and thoughtful about keeping his hips up, right? Keeping his abs engaged, shoulders back, that he's like, he has to, one, slow down, and two, he can't go heavier the way he wants to go heavy. So that's just an example of how you can manipulate the nervous system to increase intensity, right? For the sake of, in this example, is for the sake of that kid's safety. But for two, let's just say if I didn't have 25-pound dumbbells where he was using 20, how do I make 20-pound dumbbells as intense as 25. Well, add some complexity to it through challenging the nervous system.
Well, and I think sometimes we take that for granted, and we see the same people come into the gym and they do the exact same exercises all the time. And it's like, you know what, instead of always doing a chest press with a barbell, do dumbbells, do it, like you said, on an unstable surface, alternate the chest press, do it single arm with rotation. That's when he was saying the neural continuum. It doesn't even have to be just lower body, but it can be upper body as well. The more we challenge ourselves, we may have to understand too, proper form is important, because no matter how much I lift, if I'm doing it with really bad movement, then those movement patterns is what my brain is learning. And so if I slow things down, which is one of the major things we start with, especially if there's compensation, and I have you really focus on the tempo. So for example, if we're just doing the bicep curl, because everybody knows, you know, how to do that. If you come up for 1 second and you pause, and then you go down for 4 seconds, and you're not moving anything else within the body, you're just truly focusing on bending your elbow up and then slowing it down, you're actually getting more of those motor units, if you will. So the number of fibers that are working within the muscle, you're recruiting more of those. And so as we start to recruit more, the first 2 to 6 weeks, as we said in the very beginning, you might not see any gains in size, but you're actually having more gains internally. So therefore, when you start lifting heavier, you're able to fire them faster. You're going to have more efficiency within the movement pattern. And then we're going to also signal, or we're going to reduce the signaling of doing things incorrectly, because we're patterning at a slower tempo correctly before we start worrying about the amount of weight. And, you know, when we can get everything to fire the right way, and then we start to load it, that's when you're truly going to build hypertrophy or size, and you're going to be able to have good joint mobility in order to fully execute that 1 rep max without compensation. If you've got rounded shoulders and you're going down doing a really heavy chest press, you're putting a lot of pressure on the front portion of that shoulder. And then how many people, oh, my shoulder's killing me, or, oh, I've got rotator cuff problems, or I've got a labral tear. Well, you're also looking at them and they're very rounded forward. So if we can get good postural position first by slowing different exercises down to really work on posture, then when they do go down and up in a chest press, their shoulder and joint motion are going to be good. So they're going to see better symmetry. I mean, symmetry is always important, right? And they're also going to be able to lift more. And they didn't change anything except for spending a little bit more time getting the insides stronger and our brain and the different motor units, actually recruited. So therefore we can lift more. And I think that's the part that sometimes we forget. I mean, it's a lot of anatomy and biomechanics, but at the end of the day, slow it down, do it with good posture, and you're going to be able to lift heavier if that's what your end goal is.
Right. And I think, I guess one final piece to that puzzle, Wendy, is the fact that, when we talk about getting stronger, I mean, for one, be patient. It'll happen. It just happens 2 different ways. So if you're more of a cosmetic athlete, somebody who's working out for either losing fat or putting on muscles, you're basically trying to change how you look physically. I think if you're just starting that journey, just know that you got to be patient. That that 4 to 6 weeks of adaptation, a lot of that initial strength gain, like we've been saying through the podcast from beginning through now, is the fact that your strength gains are primarily due to the nervous system. But then after that first 4 to 6 week, where the nervous system is a big part of the changes that you're making, maybe not aesthetically, you're only going to burn so many calories, you're only going to lift so much weight. But after about 4 to 6 weeks, after a couple months, let's just say, your gains are now going to be based on muscular strength. So once the nervous system has made their changes, they know what muscles to recruit. Now it's the muscles' turn to see some changes. So once the connective tissue, tendinous tissue, the muscles themselves, they're bigger, they're getting stronger. Now they can contribute more so to the goals of putting on muscle or spending more calories or whatever your goal may be. As long as you're challenging your body, now it's the muscles' turn. So it's the nervous system first and then the muscles, so that when you're seeing this progress through time, again, it's about consistency. It's about staying in it for the long haul until you're done with working out, whenever that may be. Hopefully it's at the very end. But overall, it's the nervous system first, right? Then the muscles, but then it's that constant updating of that software. As you change things up, you change your routine, you change the challenges, you change the intensity, you change your phase of training from stability through strength into power. But overall, the nervous system is going to be king. So, Wendy, I think, without being, what do they call it? Brain surgeons. Basically, we just want to take the fitness side of the contribution of the nervous system or the brain.
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, my big takeaway is change your program every 4 to 6 weeks.
Yep.
Take the time, do an assessment, find out what's not working correctly, get it to fire correctly, work on your posture. That's something from 12 to 20 repetitions, really slowing down the eccentric or the deceleration portion of it. So as you're lengthening the muscle, that's when you're decelerating. Slow that down first, and then do what you're normally doing. If you've never worked out before and you walk into a gym, you lift as heavy as you can for about 5 to 8 reps, and then you're super sore and never come back. That's not what you want to do. But after you've built that foundation first, then start adding that weight. You're going to feel better and you're going to move better. That's where you're going to really start to see kind of the muscles pop. And it doesn't matter if you're trying to be a bodybuilder and get a lot of size, or you're really trying to, quote, tone up, if you will. That's when you're really going to see those types of changes. But don't take for granted the balance, the proprioception side that we talked about, because the more that you can work on those stabilizers within the foot, that's going to help control what's happening at the hips and the glutes, which everybody needs strong glutes and hips. But, incorporate different plyometric training. That's going to help with synchronization. That's truly where we're going to get higher firing rates. So we're going to be able to produce greater force if we're trying to get faster. All of that is important, and all of it should be incorporated. So just when you're looking at your program, find out what you're missing. Don't just walk in and just work out. Like, walk in with a plan. And that's going to be something I think is really important. But, make sure too that you're just being smart in what you're doing.
Yep. I mean, the brain is just one of those. It's a component that wants to be upgraded. It wants to be changed. So those parts that you talked about, Wendy, with regarding your workout plan, you need to get into power. You need to move fast. You need to move quickly. You need to recalibrate, and that's why we do stabilization training intermittently throughout the year, if not, recovery sessions to hone in on the aspect of being able to control the body, which means your brain is kind of saying, okay, this is what we got to do to be safe. So it just needs a chance, and we, unfortunately, it just needs a chance. Just give me a chance. So hopefully you guys, listeners here of the Random Fit podcast of both Wendy Batts and I, Ken Miller, we appreciate you spending your time with us and hopefully getting at least a little something that can help improve how you live and how you work out. So if you like what you listened to today, like, follow, subscribe, download, give us a 5 out of 5 rating when you can. But more importantly, let us know what other topics you want us to talk about in the future. So until next time, everybody, take care and be well.